My name is Layla. I'm 31 years old, and for a long time I believed my value came from being invisible. That's right, invisible, because that's how I learned to survive. I was born and raised in a small town surrounded by the desert, within an extremely traditional Muslim family. My father was more than a spiritual leader. He was feared and revered. When he entered the mosque, everyone fell silent. His words seemed sacred, as if they came straight from heaven. But at home, this authority transformed into absolute control. What he said was law. Nothing was discussed. There was no room for questions. Our home was like a fortress. We lived in a gated community, surrounded by high walls and closely guarded. My father had 2 wives, many children, and wielded such power that even the local authorities avoided confronting him. From the outside, we were seen as an exemplary family, but inside, we were hostages to a distorted faith, suffocated by rules and fear. From a young age, I learned to obey without hesitation. I was the exemplary daughter, always with my head bowed, my eyes on the ground, never looking a man in the eye. I knew every prayer, every rule, every expected gesture. On the outside, I seemed at peace. Inside, there was a hole, an emptiness I couldn't explain. It wasn't hunger, though I often went to bed without dinner, after all the guests had already eaten. It was a thirst to be seen, to be recognized as someone, as a daughter, as a person. I remember the nights I'd sneak up to the terrace. I'd stand there, staring at the sky. The desert seemed to swallow the whole world, but the stars were there, far away. I'd whisper softly, "Is anyone there? Does the Lord see me? Or are you just counting how many rules I've broken today?" I never heard an answer, only silence. And for years I believed that silence was all I'd ever have. By the time I turned 20, I was already carrying a heavy burden. I was practically the manager of the household. I took care of my father's second wife, who was younger and more inexperienced. I prepared dinners, received visitors, and organized every detail of the family routine as if I were a machine. All of this in the name of honor, because for us, a woman's destiny was marriage, and the more influential the husband, the more respected the family. But time passed, and my father never mentioned marriage to me. I thought maybe it was because he respected me too much. Maybe he thought I wasn't ready yet. I wanted so badly to believe that. Then came the day that changed my life. It was an ordinary evening, after the last prayer of the day. I was in my room when I was called to my father's study. I walked with my eyes on the floor, as I always did. When I arrived, he called me by name, Layla, with a gentleness that disarmed me, and he began to talk about me, praising my obedience, my purity, my fidelity. I stood there, unsure of where this conversation was going, until he said, "I have chosen you for myself. You will be my wife." For a moment, the world stopped. I couldn't breathe. I repeated quietly, in disbelief, "Your wife?" He just smiled, as if he were giving me a gift, as if it were a privilege. In that instant, I realized that everything I thought was protection was actually prison, and that the man I respected most was about to destroy my soul. But it was also there that something began to change. For the first time, that silence I heard in the early hours of the morning seemed to scream inside me. Something was saying, "This isn't love. This isn't from God." I didn't know who that voice was yet. I didn't know Jesus. But today I know. It was him. It was the Holy Spirit calling me daughter. This story doesn't end there. It was the beginning of a long journey, of escape, pain, healing, and finally encounter. Encounter with a God who sees me, who hears me, and who never wanted my blind obedience but my free heart. Today I am free, not because someone gave me permission, but because Christ rescued me. I was invisible, but he saw me. He looked at me with a calmness that made me sick. He said the prophet had special rights, that he too possessed them, like a kind of sacred handshake between him and God. "It is halal before Allah," he stated with frightening conviction. Then he added, "You will live with more honor than any other woman in this city." At that moment, my legs were barely supporting me. He opened the Quran and began reciting passages about submission, honor, and the blessing of being with a man of God. But his voice began to fade into the background of my mind. The sound became a buzzing sound, as if I were underwater. My vision blurred. My heart raced. My chest felt like it was carrying tons of weight. Inside me, a part of me still cried out silently, "You are my father. How can you?" The obedient daughter I was taught to be trembled, unsure whether this was truly God's will. or just a cruel distortion, a manipulation masquerading as faith. And the woman inside me, the simple, confused human woman, felt herself falling apart. The image I had of my father shattered that night. He was no longer just a feared figure. Now he was the man who wanted to appropriate my body, using the name of God himself as justification for unthinkable abuse. And worst of all, in that closed world we lived in, no one would dare question him. To everyone, he would remain the holy man. But I saw who he really was, and I knew, right then, that I had to run. My mother couldn't help me. She was his first wife, marked by years of forced obedience and imposed silences. I never saw love between them, only distance, fear, and convenience. My brothers? They were raised under the same iron roof. His word was sacred. For them, questioning my father was tantamount to defying Allah. When I left that room, my feet moved as if they no longer belonged to my body. I was there, but my soul was shattered. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked. Outside, all was silent. But inside me, there was a deafening noise, an echo of pain, fear, confusion, and, strangely, a thread of awareness emerging, as if a new, still timid voice whispered, "This is not God. This is not love." And if you're listening to this now, perhaps wondering, how can this happen? I tell you in all honesty, it happens, much more than you might imagine. Women like me have been silenced for centuries, locked away in homes, in cultures, in fears, in distorted doctrines, trapped in silences that kill slowly. So I must say, if this story has reached you, don't ignore it, not because of the numbers, nor because of its visibility, but because perhaps, right now, there is a woman, in a house similar to the one I grew up in, staring at the ceiling, believing that no one would ever believe her, that God has forgotten her, that she is invisible. Perhaps your simple act of sharing this is the spark of courage she needs, proof that there is someone out there who sees her, who listens to her, and even more, that God is not silent, he is near, even when everything says otherwise. Because yes, this is a story of abuse, but it's much more than that. It's a story of salvation, of a God who saw me when I thought I was invisible, that entered my darkness when I only saw abandonment, who found me when I felt lost forever. There are nights that we never forget, nights when the air is heavy, and the shadows seem to watch us. That night was like that, and 2 weeks later, that's when everything changed forever. When my father announced that I would be his wife, the next 14 days dragged on like a nightmare from which I simply couldn't wake up. On the outside, my routine remained the same, preparing meals, cleaning the house, greeting guests, as if everything were normal. But on the inside, every gesture was like a ticking clock, a silent countdown to the day my soul would be ripped from me. There was no engagement. There was no ceremony. There was no choice. There was only his decision. "It's decided," he repeated, as if announcing the mood, as if my life were just another of his unquestionable orders. That night, after the last prayer, he sent for me. My hands were freezing. My legs could barely support me as I walked to his chambers. Deep down, I still harbored a foolish hope. Maybe it was a test. Maybe he'd changed his mind. But as soon as I walked through the door, I knew. There was no turning back. The strong smell of incense burned in the air, suffocating. The room was immaculate. Sheets were neat, pillows were arranged. 2 freshly brewed cups of tea sat on the table, accompanied by dates arranged with almost ceremonial precision. He wore a white robe, his beard perfectly combed and perfumed with oil. But what paralyzed me was his gaze, steady, fixed, and it wasn't the gaze of a father. He gestured for me to sit down. I remained motionless. "Layla," he said with a calm that chilled the bones, "today, we begin our life as husband and wife." In that instant, my entire body froze. It was as if a rock had been dropped straight onto my chest. I wanted to scream, run, disappear. I wanted to say, "You're my father. This is wrong." But nothing came out. The only thing I could stammer was, "Baba, please." Then came the final blow. He frowned, and with a coldness I had never seen before, he replied, "Don't call me that anymore. Today, I'm your husband." That sentence tore me apart. Something inside me broke for good. He continued speaking, as if all of this were perfectly justifiable. He cited hadiths, stories of the Prophet, arguments about honor and obedience. He spoke of zinab and the marriage ordained by Allah, saying that, as a spiritual leader, he had the same right. He served tea while he spoke, as if it were a simple family gathering. Then he threw me a question that was like a knife. Do you think you are more righteous than the mothers of believers? I was speechless. Every word he said was a nail closing the coffin of my freedom, and the worst was yet to come. In a calm, almost fatherly tone, he added, "If you resist, you are resisting Allah, and the woman who disobeys her husband is cursed by the angels until dawn." It was at that moment that everything became clear. That wasn't just a father's sin. It was the manipulation of an entire faith, distorted to justify a monstrous abuse. The religion that taught me to fear God was being used as a weapon to keep me imprisoned. My prison wasn't just walls. It was made of sacred verses stripped of their true meaning, used as shackles to maintain power. That wasn't just a crime. It was blasphemy. And there I was, in the center of it all, feeling empty, as if my soul had been ripped from my body and left in the desert. What I didn't know at the time, and only came to understand much later, was that even on that dark night, God wasn't silent. He was already writing an escape route. That day, my father dismissed the servants early. He gave my stepmother direct orders not to approach his chambers for any reason. I heard the last door close behind me. I stood there motionless, my body present, my soul absent. At that moment, I realized I was no longer just a prisoner of fear. I was a hostage to silence. But even when everything seemed lost, God was already seeing me, and He was preparing the impossible. I was held captive, not by chains, but by the will of a man who used God's name to justify the unthinkable. I won't describe the details of that night, not out of fear, not out of shame, because it was never my fault, but because today, I want you to remember me, not for what was done to me, but for what God did for me afterward. I want to be remembered as someone who was rescued by a God who sees. What I can tell you is that when the adhan, the call to prayer, echoed through the city that morning, something in me had already died. My body was still breathing, but my faith was in ruins. Since childhood, I was taught that Islam is a religion of honor, especially for women, that if I obeyed Allah, He would protect me, that men like my father were sent by God, representatives of light and justice. But that morning, lying next to the man who should have been my protector, not my oppressor, I could no longer silence the question that had been whispering in the depths of my soul for years. If this is God's will, then is He really good? That question escaped my lips like a broken whisper, and there was no answer. Her absence hurt more than anything I had felt up until then. The next morning, I served my father tea as if nothing had happened. He smiled and called me my beloved in front of the others, displaying his holy image. To the community, I was still the Sheikh's obedient daughter, but behind closed doors, I was no longer a daughter. I was possession, something that was taken by force. No choice, no voice. That night I went back to my room, locked the door, and fell to the floor. And there, for the first time, I prayed without repeating any memorized words, without resorting to the sacred verses I learned since I was little. It was a scream. It wasn't a pretty prayer. It was a desperate prayer. Crying, his face pressed to the ground, he said, "Allah, if you see me, if you care about me, then take me away from here, or take my life." The silence that returned was deafening. No sign, no peace, no answer, just the echo of my pain. I think that's where the first crack appeared. Small, almost invisible, but it was the beginning of the end. The foundation of faith I was taught began to crack, because facing the possibility that the God I knew might not be what they said was terrifying. If He wasn't my protector, where could I run to? But the truth is that the cracks grow, and soon, everything began to fall apart. Today I understand. There are prisons that don't need bars. Some of the cruelest are made with sacred words, with family traditions, with threats disguised as honor, and empty promises of protection. The prison where I lived was like this. She was made of silence and authority, of fear disguised as faith. The man who should have been just my father was now my jailer, and according to him, my husband. After that night, any trace of freedom disappeared. As a daughter, I could still visit my stepmother, go to the market with other women, and discreetly participate in family life. But now, everything has changed. He said I had been elevated, chosen for a special role, that it was an honor. But the truth, he erased me, locked me up. My room turned into a cell. My clothes began to cover every inch of my body, and I could only go out accompanied, always under surveillance. The woman I was fading away. In the eyes of the world, I was just a well-behaved shadow. But inside, I was screaming, and little did I know that this scream, even stifled, was already being heard by a God who does not require silence to hear, a God who does not tolerate oppression disguised as holiness, a God who was already preparing my rescue. When guests came to the house, even family members, meals were brought to my room. I was out of sight. No one saw me, not even my brothers. This was not the respectful seclusion of a beloved wife. It was the shameful isolation of someone who needed to be kept secret. My father controlled everything. What I said, who I talked to, when I could go out. Even my prayers were watched. In the mosque, I sat among the women, my eyes fixed on the ground, my hands clasped in my lap, expressionless, voiceless, nameless, invisible. On Fridays, the imam spoke about the rewards of obedient wives, and I felt the eyes of the community turning to me, full of admiration. They thought I was an example of devotion, of purity, but inside, I was dying a little more every day. That false admiration hurt like needles in the skin. Cruel era. They praised me, while ignoring my arrest. Once, during a family gathering, my mother, my father's first wife, asked me to serve tea. As so many times before, I prepared the tray carefully, cup by cup, my heart heavy, my steps measured. I entered the room with my head down, but on that occasion, something different happened. My father looked at me. He smiled, and before everyone, uncles, cousins, elders, he said, "This is my wife, my beloved. She serves me with excellence." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Nobody moved. Some looked away, others lowered their heads, and in that instant, I knew. They knew. Everyone knew. But nobody said anything. No one dared. Some men shifted uncomfortably, looking out of the corner of their eyes, but no one raised their voice, because there, the word of a tremor was like the very voice of God, unquestionable, untouchable. It was after that day that the whispers began, in the stuffy corridors between the tea and the carpets, in the women's bathroom. She was chosen. She received a special honor. God must have favored her, and everything in me wanted to scream. That is not honor. It's a prison with golden walls. But I didn't scream, because in that world, silence was not a choice. It was survival. Silence was the shield that kept me from disappearing completely. At night, I would lie with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The blankets around me didn't keep me warm. They trapped me. Each fold was like an invisible chain, and I prayed. Oh, how I prayed, 5 times a day, and sometimes more. I began to pray louder, more desperately, thinking that perhaps my insistence would be enough to break the sky. I knelt until my knees were blue, until the pain prevented me from walking properly. I cried until I had no more tears. See me, God. Hear me. Get me out of here. Please. But the words hit the ceiling and came back cold. No response, as if the sky were sealed. There's something no one tells you about praying when you're stuck. Prayer begins to seem like madness. You say the same phrases again and again, in the hope that just this once, the sky will open. Just this once, something changes. I started fasting more than necessary, as if physical pain were a bargain with the divine, as if my hunger could get God's attention. But all I felt was a dry silence, sharp, as if God were too far away, or as if he were seeing everything and just watching. I started rubbing clay on my skin, thinking that maybe the dirt was in me, that my impurity was what prevented me from being saved. And when, once again, nothing happened, I began to wonder if God had ever truly heard me, or if I had spent my whole life talking to myself. But perhaps the worst of all was having to pretending I was the model daughter, the obedient wife, the devout woman everyone was waiting to see, pretending in front of my stepmother, the other wives, my younger sisters, so they would never discover the terror that consumed me inside. I became an actress in my own life. Every gesture, every word, every forced smile was part of a cruel theater. But no peace lasts forever, and little cracks began to appear in the script. I clearly remember one afternoon. I was cleaning the hallway near the main room. On the other side of the wall, my father was talking to another religious leader. They spoke with the arrogance of those who believe they will never be confronted. They laughed like accomplices of an invisible empire, made of silence and control. One of them said something about wives being property, an extension of a man's wealth. Then my father replied with pride in his voice, "Layla understands her place. She knows that obedience is the beauty of a woman." My hands were shaking so much that I dropped the tray. The clang of metal against the floor echoed through the house, but no one came out to see. Nobody asked anything. That night, something in me broke completely. I locked my bedroom door and knelt on the rug, as I had done so many times. But for the first time, I did not pray to Allah. With my forehead pressed against the floor and my heart torn, I just whispered, "Whoever you are, if you're there, please see me." That was all. A short sentence. Almost nothing. But in that moment, something changed. For the first time, I wasn't repeating rituals. I wasn't trying to be accepted. I wasn't asking for blessings, nor forgiveness. I was just talking. With someone. Maybe with the true God. With my heart completely exposed. The next day, my father brought me a present. A gold bracelet. He said it was for being obedient. A reward. He put it on my wrist himself. But the cold metal didn't feel like a gift. It looked like a delicate handcuff. And that's when I understood. Even his kindness was part of the prison. Everything was under control. Even the seemingly generous gestures were just prettier chains. The despair inside me was already turning into numbness. I didn't cry so easily anymore. It was like my body was trying to survive by shutting off feelings. But still, even without me realizing it, God was already moving, about to break through the walls of my cell in a way I never could have imagined. It was late afternoon. The house was plunged into a golden silence, bathed in soft sunlight streaming through the curtains. My father had gone to the mosque. The other women were in the kitchen. It was the only time of day I could breathe. I was in his office, cleaning the shelves like I did every week. Leather books, old papers, prayer perfumes. That's when my eyes fell on the oldest copy of the Quran, the one he used to teach his disciples. Heavy, worn cover, pages marked by time. Without thinking much, I opened the book, and I let the pages move on their own, stopping wherever they wanted. The pages of the sacred book stopped by themselves, as if guided by something invisible. My eyes, tired and drowned in so many unanswered prayers, landed on a passage I already knew, but had never read with a broken soul. It was to Surat al-Ahzab, chapter 33. There was the verse, clear, raw. "O Prophet, we permit you to take as wives those who offer themselves to you, those whom your right hand possesses. Exclusive privileges." Each word felt like a knife opening. One by one, the wounds I was trying to hide even from myself. It wasn't the first time I'd seen that stretch. My father had quoted him so many times, always with that same solemn tone. He said that, as a man of faith, he had special permissions, that our relationship was an honor, that other women would die to take my place, that resisting would be the same as resisting God himself. And now, there in front of me, were the words that backed up that horror. It wasn't just one man's madness. It was written, registered, aloud. My hands were shaking. I closed the book with difficulty, as if it weighed a ton. My mind repeated, almost like a muffled scream. So, is this it? This is the God I was taught to follow? A heavy silence took over the room. It wasn't the kind of silence that brings peace. It was the silence of absence, of loneliness, of confusion. At that moment, everything collapsed inside me. The faith I was taught as a child, the stories that promised me comfort, the hope that I was enduring everything for a greater cause. It all seemed like a lie. I remembered my mother, the times I saw her silent, dry eyes, motionless face, never shouted, never complained. She also thought that enduring was a sacred act. I remembered the women in my community. His back was hunched, his eyes were dull. Forced marriages, abandonment, polygamy, all in the name of faith, all validated by the same verses I had just read. But for the first time, the problem was no longer my father. It wasn't the men. For the first time, I questioned God, and that terrified me more than any punishment. Have I been wrong my whole life? Could it be that the God I trusted is the author of my suffering? What if he's no good? These questions arose silently but exploded within me like thunder. I waited for some punishment, a lightning bolt, a fainting spell, something to silence me, but nothing happened. Nothing. That silence was what hurt me the most, because if he didn't even answer me when I asked him, then where was he? I kept these doubts to myself like someone hiding shards of glass in their body. I didn't talk to my stepmother, not even with my sisters. I still wanted to protect them from that brutal truth. I didn't dare open my mouth in the mosque either. There, Everything was made of rules, repetitions, and appearances, and I had already learned, in that place, asking questions was a greater sin than living in pain. But deep down, even though I tried to hide it, I knew something inside me had died that day, and maybe that was exactly what God was waiting for. Even though I tried to hide it, that doubt tore me apart every day. It was like an invisible wound that bled every time I tried to take a deep breath and move forward. Then came another night, another one I'd like to forget, but which I carry with me to this day. My father asked me to serve tea to a visitor, another man of faith from a neighboring town. I went. With the tray in my hands, I heard the two of them talking, as if they owned the world. They talked about male leadership, about how important it was to keep women in their place. They used verses as weapons. They laughed at the idea that a woman could know her own worth, or even be allowed to seek it. And then, there came that phrase again. If a believing woman offers herself to the prophet, before this sounded like holiness, but now, it sounded like abuse with a religious seal. It sounded like prison, disguised as faith. That night when I went to bed, I didn't kneel. I didn't recite verses. I did not turn my face towards Mecca, because for the first time I admitted, I no longer knew who I was praying to. And it was there, lying in that dark room, that everything changed. Without form, without ritual, without courage, I could only whisper, if the Lord is real, if the Lord is good, show me, because I can't take it anymore. Today I know, that was my first real prayer. It wasn't for a book. It wasn't for a doctrine. It was for somebody, someone whose name I didn't know yet, but what heard me. And it was that prayer, so raw, so desperate, so sincere, that broke the silence of 31 years. I don't know if you've ever been in a dark place to the point where feeling that even existing is a burden, but I was. A place where the air suffocates you, not from lack of oxygen, but from excess pain. Where waking up is a sentence, where living is a punishment. That's where I arrived. The weight of what my father imposed on me, the silence of God, doubt eating away at the faith I thought I had. It was late at night. The call for the last prayer had already passed. The house was quiet, as if even the walls had given up on me. I was alone in my room. The only light was a dim bulb in the corner. And there, in that heavy silence, something happened. I looked at the gold bracelet on my arm, the one my father gave me as a reward for obedience, but I saw no honor at all. It burned against my skin like a cruel reminder. You are possession. You are property. On impulse, I ripped off the bracelet. I put it on the table, not as someone who keeps a gift, but as someone who returns a prison, and with a broken voice, almost without sound, I said, no, that no wasn't just for him. It was for everything, for the life I was told was my destiny, for the God who seemed deaf, for the silence that was slowly killing me. If you're there, if you're real, if you see me, then come. That was the last thing I remember. I don't know if I fainted. I don't know if I slept. I don't know if it was tiredness, or if that prayer broke some chain. But I know that it was not a normal sleep. It was as if I had passed through something, a portal, an invisible veil. Suddenly I was in an endless desert, light sand underfoot, the sky, covered in a silver light, beautiful, but strange, free, and the silence. The silence was so deep that it seemed like until the whole world held its breath. I looked down and realized I was barefoot. My abaya was torn, dirty, fluttering around me like forgotten scraps of cloth. I felt small, fragile, stripped of any dignity I might once have carried. Then, in the distance, I saw him. A man walking toward me. He was dressed in white, but not your ordinary plain white. It was a vibrant, almost luminous white, as if the light itself had woven his clothing. And the glow that enveloped him didn't come from the sun. It came from him. His steps were calm, steady, and purposeful, as if each step had a mission. My heart raced, but not with fear. There was something about this man that made me feel safe, as if his presence were an invisible, welcoming shield saying, "You are safe now." When he finally approached, he didn't speak right away. He just looked me in the eyes, and in that look, I knew he saw me. He didn't see me as possession, nor as the daughter of a cruel man, nor as a wife held against her will. He saw the 13-year-old girl who dreamed of stargazing on the terrace, and he saw the 31-year-old woman who no longer believed in anything. He saw every tear I shed, every fear I held back, every word I never dared say. I didn't cry. Not yet. He saw my heart break, and that spoke louder than any tears. Then he spoke. His voice was soft, but carried authority, as if he spoke the very truth of the world. You are not property. You are mine. Those words struck me like thunder, but at the same time, they were like water in the desert, an unexpected life I hadn't known I needed. I didn't understand everything there, no theology or rules. I just felt deep in my soul that it was real. My legs gave out, and I knelt there. The tears came then, strong, loose, heavy, and liberating. I tried to ask who he was, but my voice broke. Between sobs, I could only whisper, "Who is the Lord?" He smiled. A smile unlike anything I'd ever seen. Not a cutting smile, not a distant one. It was a smile full of love, pure love, demanding nothing, hurtless. And then he said, "I am the one who has always seen you." Those words destroyed me, because until that moment, no one had ever truly seen me the way I really was. But he saw me. Then he reached out his hand to me. When I took it, I didn't just feel warmth. I felt life, real life, a wave that coursed through my entire body, reaching the wounds no one had ever seen. The pain didn't go away, but for the first time, I wasn't alone in it, and that was the moment I woke up. I returned to my room. The lamp still illuminated the floor with that yellowish circle, and everything looked the same, but I knew better. My tear-stained face and my unusual heartbeat told me so. There was something new inside me, something silent but firm, like a seed beginning to sprout amid the rubble of my faith. The weight of pain was still there, but now there was a foundation where before there had been only shifting sand. The next morning, I waited until the house was empty. I opened my stepmother's closet and found an old cell phone that still worked. With trembling fingers, I turned on the internet and typed, "Muslim woman dreams of man dressed in white." I didn't know what I would find, but something told me that this dream was just the beginning. Hundreds of accounts began to surface in my search. People from Syria, Iran, Egypt, Lebanon, Indonesia, Somalia, men and women who, like me, had dreamed of a man dressed in white. They spoke of the same look, the same words I'd heard, "You are mine." And they all mentioned a name I'd only known from afar, from the Quran, Jesus. My heart raced. I knew who Isa was, the Isa of Islam. I had always been taught that he was a respected prophet, but nothing more. Never divine, never the Son of God, never someone to pray to. But there was something in these stories, something that lit a flame within me, a deep hope I hadn't even known I held. It was like listening to an ancient song, a melody my soul had always wanted to sing, but never knew how. I kept reading, watching videos of ex-Muslims, listening to their trembling voices, yet filled with joy and peace. They spoke of a love that didn't need to be earned, of a savior who appeared when no one else could. That night, lying in the darkness, my heart pounded. For the first time, I dared to say the name I'd always been afraid of, Jesus. The word felt strange on my lips, but not in my heart. If he was the Lord, if he was real, I asked, "Please appear." I wanted to know this Lord. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if anyone would hear me. But deep down, something told me I wasn't alone anymore, that someone had found me in my darkness and called me their own. I thought I was being careful. I swore to myself no one would ever know. Whenever I borrowed my stepmother's old cell phone, I locked the doors, kept my ears open, and my heart racing. That afternoon, I was completely absorbed in a video. It was the testimony of a woman from Yemen, a former Muslim like me, who had also dreamed of the man dressed in white. She spoke with tears in her eyes about how Jesus found her, healed her wounds, and gave her a new life. Each word seemed to pierce my heart, because for the first time, someone was speaking aloud what I felt but couldn't explain. I was so focused that I didn't hear the door open. When I looked up, my younger brother was already in the room. He looked straight at the phone in my hand. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. In a panic, I tried to lock the screen, turn the device around, hide what I could, but it was too late. "What are you watching?" he asked. His eyes narrowed. "It's just a story," I murmured, my voice breaking. But he walked over, snatched the phone from my hand, and with a few taps, started the video playing again. There was the woman talking about the Bible, about Isa al-Masih, calling him Lord and Savior. My brother's face hardened. "You are watching Christian lies," he said. Before I could say anything, he ran off, yelling for my father with a fury I had never seen before. The house became a battlefield. My father stormed in, his cell phone trembling in his hand, his eyes like burning coals. What abomination is this? It's nothing, Baba, I swear. I tried to explain, but I couldn't even finish the sentence. The slap came swiftly, without warning. I fell to the ground, tasting blood in my mouth. My brother locked the door from the outside, obeying my father's orders. I heard my father call the imam of the mosque. Then 2 of my uncles came. In less than an hour, 3 men were in my room. My father, my oldest uncle, and the imam stood there, forming a wall of judgment. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. The imam sat across from me, his gaze serious, almost stern. "Lila, we hear you're listening to Shayan's whispers," he said, his voice low and firm. I trembled, shaking my head in denial, fear paralyzing me. "No, I just wanted to understand." My father huffed angrily, as if that simple explanation were an affront. The imam then began reciting verses from the Quran in a deep, almost hypnotic tone. Then he sprinkled water on me, as if to drive out something evil. He placed his hand on my forehead and declared authoritatively, "She was taken by a jinn. That's what's leading you astray." I wanted to scream, to say I wasn't a jinn, that I was Jesus, but my voice wouldn't come out. My throat was dry. My whole body was shaking. They told me I was mentally fragile, spiritually lost. They forbade me from touching any cell phone, computer, or book other than the Quran. They said it was out of love, to protect me. But the love that locks doors and bars windows was never love. I spent days confined to my room. The window was jammed, the doorknob locked from the outside. My food was left on the floor in silence. The first night, I cried until I had no tears left. The second, the tears dried up. And on the third night, something changed. I knelt on the ground, without turning to Mecca, without reciting a single word of Arabic. I simply closed my eyes and whispered, "Jesus, I know almost nothing about you, but I know you saw me. I know you called me yours. Please don't leave me now." It was a simple prayer, but something about it opened a space within me. I heard no voices, saw no lights, but the fear that had consumed me began to dissipate. The shame that had enveloped me receded, if only a little. For the first time, even locked away and alone, I felt a presence, a small but real peace. My father thought the lock on the door would prevent me from following Jesus, but he didn't understand that, even in that cell, I already belonged to another master, one who didn't need to imprison me to set me free. By the third day, my body was already weak from hunger, but my spirit was more alive than ever. I knew that if I had the chance, even if it cost me everything, I would choose Jesus, and that chance came sooner than I expected. On the 4th day, as the sun began to disappear below the horizon, I heard a soft knock on the door, rhythmic, almost timid. I approached slowly and heard a whisper, "Layla, it's me, Isa." The name was familiar. Isa was my neighbor. Over the years, she'd always been kind to me. Sometimes, when she saw me last in line, she'd give me a piece of warm bread. Other times, she'd leave sprigs of mint on my windowsill, along with notes saying, "For your tea." Isa was a simple woman, with a compassionate gaze that broke through any distance. And in that moment, as she called my name from behind the locked door, something inside me knew everything could change. I didn't know much about Isa's life. She'd always been reserved, her face hidden, her gaze sweet but distant. Our conversations were brief and polite. But there, hearing her name whispered on the other side of the door, everything changed. "How did you know I'm here?" I asked, my voice hoarse, my heart pounding. On the other side, she answered firmly without fear. "I heard the screams. I know what they think you did." After a silence that felt like an eternity, her voice softened. "Lila, I'm a Christian, and I'm going to help you get out of here." My heart sank. No one had ever said anything like that to me. So simple, so courageous. I'm a Christian. Before, those words had always been laden with judgment, contempt, and fear. But now, they were filled with compassion, with a real promise of hope, an open door. I trembled as I asked, "What if they find out? What if they catch me?" She replied firmly, "I know the risks, but you asked for help, didn't you? He's listening to you, and I'm just part of that." As the night fell heavy and silent, Isa returned. Carefully, she slid a thin piece of wire under the door. "It's for opening the lock," she whispered hurriedly. My hands trembled, not just from fear, but from the enormity of what I was about to do. A loud click sounded inside the house and I froze. Slowly, I pushed open the door, stepping out into the dark hallway that seemed filled with invisible eyes, shadows that lurked in danger at every step. I took nothing. No clothes, no objects, just the sound of my ragged breathing and a new certainty, the decision not to look back. Isa guided each step as if she knew every corner of that darkness. We passed through a gate hidden among the bushes. I hadn't even known it existed. On the other side, a narrow, dirty, but open alley. At that moment, that alley seemed more beautiful than any garden. The air was heavy, but different. It wasn't freedom, but it was the beginning of it. Arriving at Isa's house, she offered me water, fresh bread, and a simple blanket. I sat on the floor, trying to understand if all of this was real. Then she knelt before me, her eyes fixed, steady, and full of tenderness. "Lila, I need to ask you something important. Do you truly want to follow him? Not just run away from your father, nor escape your fear, but surrender your life to Jesus, the only one who can truly save you?" The tears flowed uncontrollably. I thought of the dream, of that man dressed in white, of that voice that said, "You are mine." In that moment, my heart screamed louder than any fear. "Yes," I said softly. "Yes, even if it cost me everything, even my life." Isa smiled, tears in her eyes, squeezed my hands, and began to pray. I didn't understand all the words, but I felt something ignite inside me, a fire that burned within, bringing warmth and life. When she finished, I closed my eyes and said my own prayer. No rules, no rituals, just me speaking to him. "Jesus, I believe that you are real, that you have come to me. I surrender my life. I am yours." There was no thunder, no voices from heaven, only a peace so deep, so firm, so immense that it felt like home itself. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere, no longer to this man, but to the King of Kings. Later that night, Isa contacted a secret church, a hidden group that helped people like me find a new beginning. In the middle of the night, we were taken to a designated point. A man named Isef was waiting for us, silent and serious. He said nothing, just opened the car door and started driving. During the entire trip, no one said a word. But with each passing kilometer, I felt as if a heavy part of my soul was loosening, breaking free. I knew I wouldn't go back. It wasn't just home I was leaving behind. It was everything I had been up until that moment. The daughter of that cruel man, the voiceless woman, a Muslim only by obligation. Now I was something else, a follower of Jesus. I had no idea what awaited me, nor where I would sleep the next day, but I knew one thing: I had chosen. And even if everything fell apart around me, even if the whole world rose up against me, I wouldn't back down. I thought it would take my family a while to figure out where I was, but it didn't. About a week after the escape, I was in a simple shelter, a run-down apartment with peeling paint, the smell of stale bread and cold tea in the air. I was sitting by the window, staring at the gray sky, when Isa walked in, her cell phone clutched tightly in her hand, her fingers white from holding it so tightly. There was something in her face I couldn't read, but I knew instantly. Something bad had happened. "Layla," she said, her voice low, full of care and sadness. "You need to know. They declared you dead." I felt my throat close, the air leaving my body. She handed me the phone. Trembling, I stared at the screen. It was a screenshot of a group message from our community. My father's words were there, cold and hard, sharp as a knife. "My daughter, Ela, is no longer part of this family. To us, she is dead. May Allah judge her." I read it again, in disbelief. Dead to him. I had already been buried. My name, my place, everything I knew was gone as if it had never existed. I handed the phone back to Isa, fighting back tears and the trembling in my hands. "I thought this would hurt more," I murmured, my voice breaking. She looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to convey something I needed to understand. Sometimes the cut is so deep we don't even feel it at the time. The pain only appears later. That night, lying on the shelter's thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, I thought about how my father used to call me the pride of the family, the beautiful daughter everyone praised. And now, I was nothing, a void, a name erased. But in the silence of that cold room, another voice began to echo within me, the man in white, the gaze that saw everything in me, the voice that said, "You are mine." The next day, Isa took me to see the underground church where I would begin my new life. It was nothing like I'd imagined. No grand buildings, no stained glass windows, just a simple room, like a living room, where 12 people sat in a circle, their faces lit with a joy I'd never seen in the mosque or at home. When I entered that room, no one looked at me with suspicion or pity. Everyone smiled, as if they had been waiting for me for a long time. A woman with calloused hands hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "Welcome home, daughter, daughter of God. Not a servant, not a possession, not a disgrace. Daughter." That small circle became a refuge for my soul. The pastor spoke about baptism, about leaving the past behind and being born again in Christ. At that moment, I knew this was what I wanted, what I needed. A few days later, they filled a plastic tub with ice water. I stepped in slowly, feeling the chill wash over me. The pastor looked at me with a sweet smile and asked, "Lila, would you like to choose a new name for this new life?" I thought for a moment and replied firmly, "Miriam. It means the desire to have a child." He nodded, smiling. "Miriam, by your faith in Jesus Christ, we baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." As I was plunged into that water, I felt the weight of my father's harsh words, the shame and fear sinking down with me. And as I emerged, an immense lightness washed over me, like the first breath after being underwater for a long time. They wrapped me in a soft towel, and someone read a verse that sank deep into my heart, John 8:36. "So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." Those words covered me like a protective cloak. For the first time, I truly believed. My family had erased me, rejected me, but God had already written my name in His eternal book. My father had denied me, but the Heavenly Father welcomed me as His daughter. I was Miriam now, free. Many people think that freedom is a giant leap into the light, a complete break with the shadows. But the truth is that freedom always carries the scent of the prison we leave behind. Even after my baptism, I would wake in the middle of the night, sweaty, my heart racing, waiting to hear my father's footsteps outside. I was still startled by the sound of keys turning in the lock. I dreamed of the walled courtyard, the heavy gates slamming shut. And sometimes in the silence, I still heard that voice in my head. "You are mine. You will obey." The scars weren't just in my memory. They were on every part of my body. A sudden gesture near me made me shiver, ready to defend myself. My chest tightened as the call to prayer came from a distant mosque, a sound that brought longing and fear at the same time. It was as if every noise, every shadow, carried a piece of that life I was desperately trying to detach myself from. I needed to relearn what safety meant, something I'd always thought impossible. The shelter where I was staying became my new normal, a simple place, a room I shared with another woman, Nedia. She too had her own story of escape, her own fears and wounds. At night we hid under the covers, sharing silent secrets like children. Nadia told me something I've never forgotten. Fear never completely disappears, but love grows and takes its place. In that moment, I clung to that hope with all my might. I began to engage more and more with the underground church, finding there a home and a path to healing. That community wasn't just a group that talked about Jesus. They truly lived what they preached. They cooked for the sick, prayed for each other by name, and cried together when the pain was too much. Little by little, their love began to unravel the knots of lies I'd carried since childhood. One day during a Bible study, we read Psalm 34:18. "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." At that moment, I couldn't hold back the tears. It felt like those words were a balm for my wounded soul. It was then that I began writing in a small notebook that I carried with me everywhere. Whenever the old fear tried to return, I would look for a verse to combat it. When my father's voice whispered in my mind, I would write Isaiah 43:1. "I have called you by your name. You are mine." When shame tried to choke me, I repeated Romans 8:1. "Therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus." These words became my daily medicine, but the healing I sought wasn't just for me. Little by little, I began sharing my story with other women who also lived trapped in their own silent prisons. We did this subtly, whispered conversations, coded messages, even notes hidden under doors. Many weren't yet ready to embrace faith in Jesus, but they all drew closer when I spoke about the man in white, the one who sees beyond walls and lies. I told them, "He sees you. You have not been forgotten." Even so, I still lived cautiously. I used a different name in public and avoided places that might put me in danger. There were days when I was overwhelmed by homesickness, especially for my youngest daughter and my siblings. The thought that I might never see them again was a heavy burden to bear. But every time the urge to return arose, I remembered the darkness I left behind and the light that found me in the midst of it. I carry the scars. Yes, I still feel the fire of that pain, that struggle, but I've learned that this fire can destroy or purify. Today, I am free. Not because my past has disappeared, it is still with me, but because Jesus stepped in and transformed everything, taking me as his daughter. If someone had told me years ago that I would be here, free and at peace, called a child of God, I would have laughed or cried, because for so long I believed I belonged to a man, my father. I believed I was his property, or a distant God who turned his face away while I suffered. But now I know I belong to no one but my heavenly Father. I am not the wife of a religious leader. I am not a disgrace to my family. I am the daughter of the King of Kings. When I first read Psalm 68:5, Father of the fatherless and defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling, I felt that those words had been written for me, for my pain, for my new beginning. I lost my earthly father, not through death, but through betrayal. And in his place, God himself entered my life. The king I belong to today is completely different from the man who ruled my childhood. He doesn't use fear to control me. He doesn't hide me out of shame. He doesn't demand my silence to maintain a false reputation. He loves me, and he calls me daughter. My king calls me by name. He walks with me in the light. He clothes me with honor. And when he says, "You are mine," it's not a possession. It's love, a love that truly sets me free. I think a lot about that night I left, how I left everything behind. No family, no possessions, no idea what the next day would bring. In that moment, I was stripped of everything I knew as security, as identity. And yet, in that emptiness, I received something I never imagined possible. I received a profound peace, independent of circumstances or a safe place. I received a joy that blossoms even in the midst of storms. I received a light that shines, even when shadows insist on surrounding me. I received a hope that no one, not even the worst situations, can take away from me. Because when Jesus finds you, he breaks the chains that bound you, and there is no going back to the prisons of the past. Following Jesus has never been easy for me. I paid a high price. I lost my family, my home, the life I thought for so many years would be mine. But along with these losses, I gained something I could never have planned. I gained a new family, brothers and sisters who truly love me, a heavenly Father who never abandons me, and a future no one can erase or destroy. That's why I tell my story, not to evoke pity, but because I know that somewhere in this world, a woman is right now locked in a dark room, feeling alone and hopeless. I know there are still men who use God's name to justify abuse, to keep people trapped in fear and shame. And I also know there are those who read the Bible and, instead of finding hope, find doubt, wondering if God is truly good. To all of you I say, yes, he is good, but perhaps you need to find him outside the walls you have always known, far from the prisons that try to imprison you. If you've made it this far and heard my story, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if something I said touched your soul, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Share it so another woman, somewhere, hears about the man in white who sees her. Share it so someone lost in the darkness discovers there is light. Share it so the silence can cry out the name of the God who hears and answers. I left behind that life as the wife of a religious leader. But today, I live as the daughter of the King of Kings. Once marked by sin and rejection, I am now marked by God's unconditional love. Once I was a promise made by the will of man. Now I am a promise sealed by the sovereign grace of my heavenly Father. And if he could find me, if he could reach me, I believe with all my heart that he can reach you too. I leave you with the words that have become the anthem of my new life, the truth that has transformed everything for me. Therefore, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. John 8:36.